Hey guys, hoping all is well with everyone. So in this video we're going to be continuing our read-along of The Secret Zoo, Traps, and Specters, and today we're going to be starting with chapter 46, but just as a quick recap, we kind of hit a very pivotal point in the story from the last chapter, and at the end of the last chapter, the mysterious figure that the scouts and the descenders had trapped and ensnared and kind of caught was not DeGraff, but it was Charlie Red, and he was he was laughing a lot and kind of just laughing at the whole situation because he had just pulled a huge, not only hoax, but a very, manipulative trap on the scouts and descenders. So we're going to be continuing today with chapter 46 as the scouts and descenders try to respond to the situation and scenario that was in front of them. Chapter 46, The On Position. At the West Zoo entrance, a security guard set down his walkie-talkie and rolled his chair over to a large black box beneath a table in the small shack. He opened its top, exposing rows of knobs, buttons, dials, and lights. A large red switch had two positions, off and on. The guard gnawed on a toothpick, then rolled it across his lips. As he leaned over the box, a goopy bead of pus dripped onto it. He swiped it with a fingertip and held it near his eyes. Then he touched the cut on the side of his face, the place from which the pus had fallen. The wound was moist, fresh. He felt its heat. He smiled. His change was already happening, just as Charlie had promised. He turned his attention back to the large box in front of him. It was an RF jammer, a military-grade device that could block communications across different radio frequencies. Not long ago, Charlie had secretly delivered it to him. The guard reached back into the case. With a twist and pull, he calibrated a few remaining settings. Then he turned the big switch on to the on position. Chapter 47, The Battle on the Playground. A loud pulsing sounded erupted in Noah's ear. As he swung his head up and turned off his headset, he realized the other crossers were doing the same. "We're being jammed," Sam said. "The headsets. Keep them off." Noah glanced behind him and watched the smile spread on Charlie's face. This was part of Charlie's plan. The Sasquatches crept forward, snarling, their bodies slinking in and out of the shifting fog. Streams of blood oozed from their infected gums and trickled off their lower lips. Hannah stood, braced to fight. Tamron swept his tail back and forth along the ground, spilling waves of wood chips across its spikes. Sam shook his wings and ruffled his feathers. Solana held clusters of quills in her fists. Noah looked to his friends. Ella was pale with shock, and Richie's whole body was trembling. Even Megan was afraid, her eyes open as far as the rims of her narrow glasses. "Guys," Sam said, "we can't let these things leave the schoolyard. We do, and it's all over." The descenders nodded. Sam swung his attention to the scouts. "I want you to get back. Get out of..." Before he could finish, the Sasquatches charged and the scouts bolted into the foggy playground, a strange landscape of steel bars and dangerous heights. The four friends quickly crouched behind a row of play panels with gears that spun, wheels that turned, and bells that rang. They peered over and around the panels, watching as the descenders and Sasquatches jumped at one another. Solana released the quills from her grip. The bars flew like miniature missiles and stuck in the front of the Sasquatch, which grabbed and pulled at its chest, tearing them out. Solana plucked more quills from her jacket and attacked a second time. "The Sasquatches! How did they get into our school?" Megan asked. With his gaze locked on the fight, Noah said, "I have no idea." Tamron lunged toward and forward, sweeping around his tail about 4 feet off the ground. Two Sasquatches dodged backward, just missing his attack, but a third wasn't so fortunate. It flew sideways and slammed down about 10 feet away, plowing through wood chips and raising dust in the fog. When a Sasquatch cocked its arm to swipe at Sam, the descender dove straight up. He kicked out his feet, released his talons, and clasped the Sasquatch's arm as it passed beneath him. With a yank of his legs, he pulled the beast to the ground. Hannah jumped onto her hands and flipped, planting her boots against the gut of the Sasquatch. The beast buckled, shot backward through the air, and crashed against a brick wall of Clarksville Elementary, rattling the ceramic shingles on the rooftop. To Noah, everything suddenly seemed impossible again. How could monsters live in a world connected to his? How could kids use magic to transform themselves? And how could these two groups be fighting on his school playground? Cameron heaved his tail through the wood chips and took out the legs of the Sasquatch, which fell to its stomach with a ground-shaking thump. Hannah sprang forward, several stories high, and came down directly on its spine. The monster went limp, and its bloody tongue slipped from its mouth. "Guys!" Ella said. She pointed over to the panel in front of her. "A tic-tac-toe game with large spinning letters. Look!" Over to one side was Charlie Red, a few quills still dangling from his back. He ran through the fracas and disappeared through the open doors of the school. Megan jumped to her feet and swung around the panel in front of her. "We can't just let him get away." "Megan, wait!" But Megan was already running after Charlie. She seemed to partly evaporate in the fog before disappearing in the dark school. As Ella stood to chase after her best friend, Noah grabbed her arm and yanked her down beside him. The panel that she'd been hiding behind exploded into pieces, tic-tac-toe spinners shooting in all directions, bouncing and rolling across the playground. In the jagged remains of the panel stood a Sasquatch, wood chips stuck in its hair. Its yellow eyes looked straight at Noah. Noah peered around the Sasquatch to Richie. "Go! Help Megan!" Richie stood frozen in his nerd costume, his pants pulled high, his white socks exposed. Ella waved her hand toward the school. "Richie! Go!" Richie turned and ran toward the dark doorway. Ella and Noah had no choice but to turn and run the other way. They dodged a few play panels and headed across the playground. After a few seconds, they heard the Sasquatch grunt and chase after them. Ella cut across Noah, saying, "Follow me!" She circled the merry-go-round and weaved through an assortment of spring riders, seats that were shaped like animals and rocked on giant springs. At the play structure, an elaborate contraption with slides and bridges and hut-like platforms, Ella jumped onto a short metal deck and bounded up the stairs. Noah followed. At the first hut, they huddled behind two plastic walls and hid from the view. They waited. They listened. They heard the now distant sounds of the descenders battling the Sasquatches, but nothing else. With their knees pulled up to their chests and their arms wrapped around their shins, they were so close to each other that Noah could feel Ella's breath, warm and moist, like steam from a pot. Patches of dense fog rolled through the play structure, leaving wetness on their costumes. He thought of Megan and Richie and whatever danger they now faced in the school. He thought of the descenders and how Sam had ordered the scouts away. Were the scouts useless? Had the descenders been right a year ago to want them kept away? They heard something. A grunt, then a growl. The Sasquatch was nearby. Something snapped loudly. A piece of metal, maybe. Noah peered out between two panels. The Sasquatch had broken a spring, knocking a yellow duck to the ground. The beast took a few steps, grabbed a happy blue whale, and hurled it into the air. Noah pulled back his head. The Sasquatch was coming their way. Noah stared into Ella's eyes and mouthed, "Don't move." They soon heard another grunt, this one almost directly beneath them. Noah looked down. Through the openings in the metal grate, he saw the ground, a distant spread of wood chips. Another sound came, a soft, rumbling growl, closer than ever. Through the grate, Noah saw nothing. Then, something. A long leg of the Sasquatch. Then its arm, its body. The monster was directly beneath them. Chapter 48. The Padlock. As Megan rushed deeper into the school, the sound of the fight faded and then vanished altogether. The only light in the lower wing of the Clarksville Elementary streamed down from the pair of fluorescent bulbs toward the middle of the hall, leaving the ends dark. Megan peered into the distance and saw Charlie, his fedora hat once again on his head, his trench coat fluttering behind him. He turned right, disappearing from view. She charged faster. Seconds later, she reached the end of the lower L wing. The hallway continued straight, passing between the media center and the cafeteria. A new hallway branched off to her right. Megan turned and chased after Charlie. To her left, the glass wall of the media center blurred past, a few lights revealing long rows of bookcases, tables, and computers. Megan sped past the Halloween decor, fake cobwebs in corners, papier-mâché pumpkins in glass cabinets, black cat posters on the walls. She stopped at another corner and spotted Charlie Red nearing the far end of the hall. "Charlie!" Megan tore after him, lockers and classrooms streaming by. She passed through a cone of light and then closed in on Charlie, who'd stopped at the dead end. Two double doors blocked him from getting outside, a thick chain coiled around their steel handles. Charlie fumbled with the padlock, and Megan wondered why. Surely he didn't have a key. A security guard from the Clarksville Zoo had nothing to do with the school. Then she realized what Charlie was doing. He was pulling down on the lock to make certain it was latched. Charlie wasn't trying to escape. He was making sure Megan couldn't. She abruptly halted 20 feet from the end of the hall. "Charlie!" Charlie turned and looked out at her from beneath the brim of his hat. He smiled a wicked smile and took a few steps toward her. Even in the dim light of the hallway, Megan could see the spattering of oversized freckles across his face. "Hey, Meg. Funny we should meet here. The school. Of all places." She took a step back. Something was wrong with Charlie. He seemed different. He had a new swagger in his walk and a deep drawl in his voice, as if he was having trouble getting vowels out of his throat. As he took off his fedora hat and held it in his hands, his bangs dangled across his forehead. His hair seemed more red than ever before. Megan collected her courage and spat out, "What are you doing?" The corners of his mouth curled upward. "Me? I've simply embraced the inevitable." Megan began to back up. She suddenly realized she didn't have a plan to stop Charlie. What's inevitable?" Charlie moved toward her, his trench coat clapping against his feet. "Him." "Who?" Megan asked. "DeGraff?" Charlie nodded. "And it's very important now that you and your friends don't interfere." A low growl sounded behind her, and she spun around. At the far end of the hall, more than 100 feet away, was a Sasquatch. Like an ape, it was standing on its four limbs, rocking from side to side. When it threw back its head and roared, Megan saw the silhouette of its fangs. It dropped its chin and crept toward her. Charlie walked past Megan and headed toward the far end of the hall. "Goodbye forever, Megan." She simply stood still. Then she scanned her surroundings and fully realized her predicament. She was totally trapped. And I'll stop the video there, but I hope you guys enjoyed this video. As you guys can probably sense, it's getting much more suspenseful and intense. Kind of a big twist of things now that we understand that the original figure wasn't Charlie Red, or it wasn't DeGraff, but it was Charlie Red under DeGraff's orders, so to speak. And it seems like now that Charlie Red is almost kind of like under manipulative control of DeGraff, perhaps. And all these Sasquatches, even though the Descenders are doing their best to fight with their animal powers, it's kind of almost like no, the Scouts are gonna have to be almost like kind of brains versus brawn, so to speak. So we will definitely continue to see kind of how the Scouts manage their predicament. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video as always. Thank you so much for watching. Please take good care of yourselves and be safe. And until next time, we'll see you then. Take good care, guys. Bye.